Roll camera. Sounds rolling. GLB Saturday, take one.
Well, I don't feel as much at home here as I do in Detroit any longer. But I often have to remind myself that I am a New Yorker and I grew up in New York. And what's really interesting here is that you feel that connection with the rest of the world more on the East Coast than you do in Detroit. You have a sense that the world, the news, the word goes out from here, but that the word of Detroit goes out from New York, I think is important. Well, someone asked me recently, what do I think is my most important contribution? And I think that my answer was that I've lived over 50 years in the same house and over nearly 60 years in the same neighborhood. I mean, just staying in one place is so important in this world that's so transitory. It's very interesting to be here tonight. I read about blue stockings in the book Whirlwinds of Change and was anxious to come here. I didn't really know that it was in the middle of Chinatown. I don't know whether folks know, I'm a New Yorker. I don't feel like one at this moment, but I grew up in New York, in Jackson Heights. I went to college at Barnard College. I spent 10 years here from 1943 to 1953 working with C.L.R. James on working on Marx and Lenin and Hegel. And I've only been in Detroit for the last sort of nearly 60 years. Most of that time in the same house. Well, I think we're very fortunate in Detroit that we sort of remember nostalgically plants where there were 120,000 workers and now there may be 2,000 workers. So you have that sense that a lot of changes have taken place in a relatively short time. To have that historical experience within your own lifetime, I think is extraordinarily important. And we a lot of people have had it, but we haven't put it together.
It's gonna be 27:16.
I know, but it just got here. It just came back.
Do you want it back?
It's wonderful to be in an independent bookstore. And it's the perfect setting for this book, because this book is definitely an anti-capitalist project. And an anti-capitalist production. We're on a non-commercial educational press, and all of the proceeds from this book are going back into the struggle in Detroit.
You're here.
And so I just want to do a brief introduction of Grace, and because I'm in a bookstore, I just feel like I want to read some of the books. I've never done this before. Few of us will be lucky to live to 95 years of age with any faculties, let alone the full and vigorous abilities with which Grace Lee Boggs continues to approach her political and intellectual life. We need to appreciate how the personal and political identifications that consign Grace to the margins of 20th century politics, being a woman, being the daughter of Chinese immigrants, being a radical, being a philosopher activist, how these things that consign Grace to the margins of the 20th century now uniquely position her to speak to the dilemmas of 21st century America. But as Jimmy Boggs, Grace's life partner, intellectual collaborator, and political comrade for 40 years, was wont to say, just coming out of your mother's womb does not make you a human being. Jimmy Boggs urged us to recognize the role creative thinking and responsible action play in advancing humanity. To understand what Grace represents to us today, we might add, just getting old doesn't make you wise. As she recounts in this book, Grace had the great fortune to be not just a witness, but also an active participant in the humanity-stretching movements of the 20th century. Her close associates have included people who changed the course of history, such as the legendary actors Ruby Dee, who joined us yesterday, and Ossie Davis, the Pan-Africanist and Ghanaian President Kwame Nkrumah, and the pioneering Black Marxist C.L.R. James. Grace once met in New York with Malcolm X to propose that he join the revolutionary activities she was undertaking with other Black Power activists in Detroit. He said he had other things he had to do at that time, and of course we know his time was very short. Still, the most formidable figure in her life has undoubtedly been Jimmy Boggs, and Grace may say more about that partnership. If it is possible to pinpoint one characteristic that distinguishes Grace, and really her partnership with Jimmy, it is that she embodies the unity of theory and practice in a manner that has become increasingly rare.
I'm going to give you two examples of the connection between philosophy and activism. In the early 1970s, we had a lot of crime in Detroit. A lot of people, a number of people were actually having goods stolen from their homes by friends. And we weren't inviting people to our houses for a while because they would come in and look around and case the joints, and then the things would disappear. And then neighbors would buy things that had been stolen from other people, from friends. And we had how do we deal with this thing? And we proposed that people should band together not to buy hot goods. And that would be a manifestation of the human spirit. It would be an action taken in relationship to a very real question, but it would have something to do with who human beings were, with redefining who we were. And that's the question of philosophy. Who are we? And another thing, when the question of casino gambling came up, the mayor proposed casino gambling to replace the casino industry, to replace the auto industry, to create jobs. And we created the program Detroit Summer, based on the example of Mississippi Freedom Summer, 1964. And the young people who volunteered for the program defined the program themselves as a way to rebuild, redefine, and respirit the city of Detroit from the ground up. You put forward a program in such a way that people understand that it's more than a material thing, that it's an action, but that it involves the human spirit. You know, for most people, Detroit was once the national and international symbol of the miracles of industrialization. And then it became the national and international symbol of the devastation of deindustrialization. And that's the picture that most of you have in your mind of abandoned houses and vacant lots. But you know, people are coming from all over the world these days to make films, to take pictures of how these vacant lots have created the space and the place for us to begin anew.
And the state of Michigan has passed an emergency manager law which allows the Republican governor to simply designate someone to be in charge of school systems or cities who's unelected and who's basically not accountable to any of the voters. So that's what's happening. We're seeing on the one hand, literally the elimination of any semblance of representative democracy. In the Detroit public school system, which I'm sure some of you have heard about, yesterday, one of these emergency financial managers, a man by the name of Robert Bob, appointed from outside of Detroit, came from Washington, D.C., laid off every teacher in the entire school district. There was an order to close nearly half of the schools in the district that also came from the state. To try to avoid that, what they're trying to do instead is close some of the schools and turn all the rest of the schools into charter schools between now and the start of the school year. And if they can't turn them into charter schools, they can't get someone to agree to do that within the next month, and they're going to shut down most of those schools. And so there's a school in Detroit called the Catherine Ferguson Academy, and we talk about it in the book because it's really a model of creativity and imagination in the midst of despair and abandonment. It's a school in one of the most devastated neighborhoods in the city. The blocks around it have maybe one or two houses on each block in many instances, because 38% of the land and structures in Detroit are now deemed to be vacant. And it's a school for teenage mothers and pregnant girls, who many of you know have the highest rates of dropout among all students. And it has an imaginative curriculum that tends to their needs, to nurture life, to take care of their children. And along with that concept, what they've done is they've torn up their entire concrete playground and put in an urban farm, not just with plants and produce and bees and fruit trees, but also with cows and chickens and goats. And they've got an imaginative science teacher that had them build a big red barn as part of their science project, so it's a hands-on, practical form of learning, like Grace talks about, and it's attracted attention from all over the world. And this school is now on the list of schools projected to close if they don't find, within 1 month, a charter system to come in and replace the entire administration and somehow take over the whole school, as if that can be done effectively between now and the start of the next school year.
Great victory for During this whole thing, I didn't know if there were enough people who cared about my girls to make sure that we could stay open, and I so appreciate your coming. Thank you so much.
We're going to stay here. We ain't going nowhere. So tell DSA where they can go. Keep this school open. These children learn how to be parents. They get in trouble. But when we the parents stay behind them, they going to do better. So that's why we got to stand out here and fight for what I right.
Before I came to Captain Ferguson, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have nobody. Captain Ferguson actually taught me how to be like a mom.
We can all learn anywhere else. We could go talk. There's plenty of schools around here. Us as the mothers, we could go anywhere. But this is about our children. They all can't go everywhere. All daycare centers aren't early education centers. Our children will not learn everywhere the way that they do here.
I had a speech ready, to keep the school open and don't close my school. But since it's open, we're going to help it get better and not, I know it's going to come a charter, but we can change that. And we can help everybody else's school. And I'm fighting for all DPS schools. Thank you.
The school is a microcosm of so much that's happening in this community. We're in the process of rebuilding this community, and in rebuilding this, we need the courageous voices of these young girls. We need the courageous voices of this extraordinary principal here. We need your voices, because you stood up. I see the workers here from the UAW here. I see ordinary community people here supporting this true demonstration of grassroots democracy. And that's what you are right here. You're right here. You're not victims. You're not victims. This is not about victimization. This is about people taking control and saying what our possibilities are. Reimagining what this community views.
This victory of Catherine Ferguson is a huge victory. It's a victory for the people of Detroit. It's a victory for the new civil rights movement. It's a victory for the labor movement. It's a victory for everyone that stands for social justice, that stands for equality, and that will not accept the new Jim Crow in America today.
It is not only that we won a victory here today, but we have transformed ourselves. Because it makes no sense if you change a school, if you don't change yourself.
That's right. That's right.
You understand what I'm saying?
That's right.
You got a whole lot of different groups here with different ways of looking at things, and you came together on this, and you see it in a similar fashion. Make sure that out of this victory, that you maintain the connections that you've had.
it's been hard to think in terms of revolution and for a spiritual. And yes, that's what it is. And to say, it takes a whole lot of guts to say, this is the time to grow our souls. And yet to say that and say it comfortably, and to know that it means a great deal, that we're not talking about things, we're talking about something much more profound than things. And I think we have to understand that spiritual leadership was enormously important in the Black movement, and that we have not been able to deal with it. We've thought of it, we know that the churches were very important places where people met, but the songs, that sense of we can overcome, that redefinition of freedom through singing, all that is part of spiritual leadership that we've been afraid to deal with it because we're too so scientific, we're too rational.
Yeah, one more.
Sorry. I was struck by your comments about the relationship between work and labor. You seem to assume that it's kind of a foregone conclusion that the idea of being fairly compensated for your labor, that's impossible and that we should embrace that as an opportunity to reimagine work. But there is a labor movement, right, with a kind of like deep and long investment in this idea that people should be fairly compensated for their labor. And as I don't have to say to anybody here, it's under attack right now, and that very idea is under attack. And it has summoned a lot of imagination from people, places like Wisconsin, all over the country, of trying to defend that idea. Would you, given your understanding of work and it being a foregone conclusion, would you say that our energies, I count myself among them, would you say our energies are misplaced in trying to defend this idea? And if so, where should we be putting our energies instead with regard to this issue of labor?
I think for you and for most people, the labor movement is the movement that emerged after World War II, not the labor movement that emerged in the 30s, right? The labor movement that emerged in the 30s was a movement for the dignity of labor. That was not the movement which Reuther created, with the benefits which came out of really World War II. So I think what's happening in Detroit, by the way, is very interesting. We celebrated International Women's Day in Detroit with the women of the UAW. Their initiative was to celebrate what women were doing in the plant, or bring women who were activists in the plant together with women who were creating caring communities. And that is a connection which begins to show us why the labor movement is no longer a movement, why it is on the defensive. Because what is taking place in the community with women is not so much what you get paid for. Most women who are working in their homes, taking care of children and taking care of families, are not counting the hours that they spend. They're not thinking of compensation by hour or by minute or by overtime.
We need to get beyond the notion of a special American standard of living, right? Because so much of the gains of the labor movement were also a product of American empire. They were a product of a military-industrial complex, and they were also really standards for white men in a certain class of jobs that were denied other immigrants, women, people of color in so many ways. And so much of the racism and the materialism, consumerism of the post-war era, which is an era I study a lot in history, was about a privileged class maintaining a standard of living at the expense of others. So I think, again, important lessons from history, important ongoing struggles. How do we move beyond defensiveness to projecting new ways? The question of movements that inspire rather than drain our energy. You want to answer?
Oh, I don't like how-to questions. Well, I don't mind answering it about me, but I think the idea that I can answer it for you, I think is not right. I gain an awful lot from the people around me. It's not me. It's that I am related and connected with so many people who refresh me and invigorate me and inspire me and do things that help me to grow.
Well, you might want to have somebody.
Like 12 years.
Enjoy it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're going to come back to the
Hi. Sure, I'd love to.
So you guys last night yesterday. It was so incredible.
See you at the breakfast forum? Where it is?
Yes. Oh, see, that's
I think you can start.
Let's try this.